The Philippines is not LGBTQIA friendly. This has been my thesis for a while now, and many have either agreed or disagreed with me. Those who have disagreed with me would usually cite things like our predominantly gender-neutral language or the fact that Vice Ganda and Boyabunda are two of the most popular and richest celebrities in Filipino show business, or they would mention the fact that we have lots of gay pageants in our barangays, so surely we are gay-friendly and for that matter also LGBTQIA friendly. And hey, I get it. When CNN tells the world that we have gay-friendly beaches and another survey shows that some 73% of the population thinks that homosexuality is acceptable, which is a weird way of putting it, by the way, for a survey, I can see why we feel no need to dig deeper and see the real systemic issues plaguing LGBTQIA Filipinos. A Pew survey published some time ago shifted the questions a little bit and asked Filipinos whether homosexuality was morally acceptable instead. The results? 65% of the survey participants said they personally believe homosexuality was immoral. A Thomson Reuters article which featured this same survey concluded that there was a great gap in our kababayans' belief whether homosexuality should be accepted and their personal beliefs about whether it was immoral, thus informing their attitude towards not only gay people, but the LGBTQIA community at large. And that hit the nail on its proverbial head, because if people think that someone's existence is a morality question, mainly fueled by Christian and more specifically Catholic beliefs, then that puts this marginalized community in great danger. That is a direct pipeline to violence that now more than ever has become so real and frightening that we need to finally pay attention. These are the cases of Jessa Remiendo and Ebeng Mayor. Mabuhay Lagim fam, welcome to another episode of Lagim, a Filipino true crime podcast. As it is Pride Month, I wanted to contribute to discussions about Filipinos in the LGBTQIA community back home. In the past years, I have avoided featuring cases involving anyone from this community during Pride Month because I suppose I did not want to be a killjoy or highlight horrible violence when this month is supposed to be about honoring and celebrating everyone within the LGBTQIA community. It was the reason I featured Jennifer Laude's case or Jang Lucero's case at a different time and never in June. But this is what I have come to realize, and something that I've always known but never applied in this podcast every Pride Month. Pride was never a nice, peachy, solemn, and joyful thing. If you take a few minutes to learn how Pride started, you will see that Pride started as a riot, a rebellion, a shout, and a fight for justice and equal rights. The beauty of Pride will always come with the ugly reality that so many gay, lesbian, trans people, queer, and non-binary people are being persecuted, discriminated against, and even killed for just being who they are. So I made the decision to finally talk about these two cases, to talk about the violence and the heartbreak, to highlight to you how important it is to be an effective ally to the community now more than ever. Today, we are discussing two cases back to back. As always, many details in these cases are triggering, so please take care of yourself whilst listening. Our first case takes us to the north, to Pangasinan specifically. As part of the Ilocos region, Pangasinan is a rather underrated coastal province that is not only proud of their well-known 100 Islands National Park, but also of its wide sandy beaches in Alaminos and Bolinao. It is also in Alaminos that Jessa Remiendo was born. When she smiled, Jessa had this twinkle in her eye that later in life belied the burden she had come to carry as the breadwinner of her family. From Alaminos, Jessa and her family moved to Bolinao, where she was able to get a job at the Valdivia resort. Colleagues would later say that Jessa took on many roles at the resort, but one thing was absolutely clear: she was a hard-working woman. It was not surprising, therefore, that on September 16, 2019, a Monday after a hard day's work, Jessa, her sister, and some other colleagues decided to blow off some steam. The group decided to drink before heading home. Nothing unusual, especially given the busy weekend they just had. In the middle of the group having a drink, Jessa, who had been seen texting someone off and on all throughout the evening, excused herself, saying she needed to buy some cigarettes. What should have been a very short trip to a store nearby seemed to have taken ages, and at some point, Jessa's colleagues and sister were left wondering why she had not returned. Now, I'm not sure if they attempted to contact her or just assumed that she must have just gone home, but the next point in this timeline of events is a gruesome discovery the next day at around 6 in the morning. On the 17th of September at around 6 in the morning, residents of Patar Beach in Bolinao, Pangasinan woke up to a horrible sight right outside their doorsteps. A bloodied body full of horrific injuries was found on the beach, but no one at that time could identify who the body belonged to. After the police were called in, it was determined that sadly, the body found at Patar Beach was that of Jessa Remiendo. Jessa's body was in a bad state and deprived of all dignity. Please note that the next few sentences will graphically describe how the police found her. Jessa was all but stripped of her clothing that were near her body. The clothes were soaked in blood and sand. She sustained multiple stab and slash wounds, but the most brutal and probably fatal one was the slash wound that almost completely decapitated her. The scene and Jessa's body told a story of a horrible and painful death, but I think it is very much worth mentioning at this point that she fought until the very end. The medical examiner found lots of apparent defensive wounds, indicating that Jessa did not go down without a fight for her life. Her death also told a story of a crime that seemed rather personal. The stabbing and near decapitation indicated anger on a very deep level, so it was only logical for the police to take a closer look at those who knew Jessa very well. The crime scene itself yielded as much information or evidence as it could. However, the police could not find a murder weapon, and it would also seem to them at that point that Jessa's murder did not start there. Whilst this location could be considered the primary crime scene where she was murdered, somehow the police knew there was more to it. Despite the lack of a murder weapon at the crime scene, they did stumble upon Jessa's cell phone, and even though it would take a bit of time to open it as it was PIN code protected, the information in it would lead to a major break in the case. More to that later. In the meantime, Jessa's family was notified, and it could not have been an easy call. In a video from the show Soko, available on YouTube right now, it would seem that Jessa's mom was notified by her own niece around an hour after Jessa was found. From that point on, life would never be the same for the Remiendos. When Jessa's body was finally examined, it was determined that she died of what is called a hypovolemic shock, meaning that at some point her heart was unable to pump blood into her body, causing, amongst other things, organ failure. This is just a fancy way of saying that Jessa died because she bled out so much after being stabbed, slashed, and hacked to death. When these and other details already mentioned came out in the media, the public was horrified. The LGBTQIA community, specifically in Pangasinan, visibly and proudly led by Noreen Barber of the United Pangasinan Association LGBTQ+ group, were outraged and called for a swift resolution in this case. It was interesting to observe as well that whilst Noreen Barber and most of the LGBTQIA community were in agreement that Jessa's murder sounded very much like a hate crime, the police were very quick to push back on this. Although they said they were exploring the hate crime angle, it looked to me in all the sources that I've used that they were not comfortable escalating the categorization of Jessa's murder as a hate crime. They kept insisting that yes, the killing was unusual and brutal, but they stopped short of calling it a hate crime. The reason they said it was unusual was because Jessa's murder was the first of its kind, as in this was the first case in which a trans person had been murdered in Pangasinan. Now, unusual does not cancel out hate. After all, like in all things in life, there is a first time for everything. But let me go back to the hate crime issue and explore this a little bit with you. A hate crime, according to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, is a criminal act motivated by bias or prejudice towards particular groups of people. A hate crime comprises two elements, a criminal offense and a bias motivation. Per this definition, a hate crime has taken place when a perpetrator has intentionally targeted an individual or property because of one or more identity traits, or when the perpetrator has expressed hostility towards these identity traits during the crime. People or property associated with or even perceived to be a member of a group that shares an identity trait can also be targets of hate crimes, such as human rights defenders, environmental activists, journalists, community centers, or places of worship. So how does Filipino criminal law deal with hate crimes? Is there actually an offense called hate crime in our revised penal code? The short and current answer is no. But there does not have to be an offense called quote-unquote hate crime necessarily, and specifically. A hate crime is either an offense against the person or someone's property, so there's always a base crime here, and that can be assault, property damage, or murder. These are the starting points for the police or the prosecution when investigating and prosecuting suspects. If there is evidence that these crimes were committed because the perpetrator was motivated by bias or prejudice, then this should become an aggravating factor, thus transforming the basic crime of murder, for example, into a hate-motivated murder, aka hate crime. But why can't we just be satisfied by saying that it is murder? Well, the problem needs to be named and addressed and not simply prosecuted under the general banner of murder, because this would not be telling the whole story and will not serve as a deterrent to those who are planning to hurt specific communities like the LGBTQIA community. It is no wonder that in the wake of Jessa's death, calls to pass the so-called SOGI Equality Bill became louder. It may not have anything to do with criminal law, but if passed, it would certainly set a precedent and trend in the protection of the lives of those belonging to the LGBTQIA community. And the threats to the community are plentiful. They permeate every aspect of a person's life, the most extreme of which is in the form of murder, something that Jessa did not see coming at all. By the 18th of September, 2 suspects were finally identified through the information found on Jessa's now unlocked cell phone, and also through the help of a rather scared witness who saw everything, someone who was there when it all went down. These 2 suspects were identified as 17-year-old Isagani Doliaga and 18-year-old Michael Orpano, who lived around Bolinao, Pangasinan. Putting the information from Jessa's phone together with the unnamed witnesses' evidence, this is how things had apparently gone down on the night that Jessa was murdered. Now, before I go any further, what the police were really missing in terms of information was what took place between Jessa leaving her sister and colleagues who were drinking and Jessa being found dead on the beach. According to the newly collected evidence, Jessa received a number of text messages from Isagani Doliaga. From the tone of the texts, it would seem that Jessa and Doliaga were sweet on each other, and if you want to read into it some more, it would seem also that the two may have maybe hooked up in the past, but please do remember this is all speculation. Doliaga insisted in these text messages that Jessa should join him for a drink or two. That was when Jessa then decided to leave her colleagues and sister and head to another part of town that also happened to be by the beach. When Jessa joined Isagani Doliaga, he was not alone. He was with another man named Michael Orpano and someone named Manny, who would later become a witness for the police. We would learn that the men had been drinking since that afternoon, way before Jessa joined them. They were drinking somewhere else and then settled down near the beach as the day progressed. Manny, the scared witness, told the police that he did notice how Doliaga was on his phone a lot before Jessa arrived, sort of confirming what the police already knew about the text exchange between Jessa and Doliaga. And so the four proceeded to drink some more, and as far as Manny was concerned, everyone was having a good time. At some point, Doliaga left the group and no one thought anything of it, least of all Jessa. However, when Doliaga came back, his demeanor had changed completely, and in his hand he carried a machete or itak. Without missing a beat, Doliaga lunged at Jessa and started hacking at her, but Jessa was able to run away. Manny, the witness-to-be, was stunned at how the night's events turned. He said that as soon as Jessa ran away from where they were drinking, both Doliaga and Orpano gave chase. Manny stayed behind but eventually ran after them only to hide as he was scared they would come after him too. Nevertheless, he hid in a way that he was still able to see what the two young men were doing to Jessa. According to Manny, Doliaga and Orpano eventually caught up with Jessa. Orpano held her down whilst Doliaga proceeded to strangle her. When it was clear that she was now incapacitated, Doliaga hacked at her repeatedly. It was overkill, and it still wasn't over. After it became clear that Jessa was dying or perhaps was already dead, Doliaga slit her throat. Manny saw it all and knew that he needed to get away from the scene as soon as possible, so he ran away. Approximately 6 hours later, Jessa's remains would be found. Earlier, I mentioned how it would seem from the text messages recovered from Jessa's phone that both she and Doliaga seemed sweet with each other. From what I could gather in the articles and videos I used for my research, the police seemed to agree with that theory. The only thing they additionally speculated about was that Jessa seemed more keen to pursue something with Doliaga, but he did not seem to feel the same way and was said to have a girlfriend already. That did not answer the question, though, as to why Doliaga seemed to have had such hate or anger towards Jessica, judging by the way he killed her. The police were not to wonder that long anymore, though, because at some point after their arrest, Doliaga and Orpano confessed to their crimes and even signed affidavits. Doliaga confessed that he was mad at Jessa because she was telling people both in real life and on social media that she was in a relationship with Doliaga. He did not like this. He also did not like the fact that his then-girlfriend could potentially find out about the things Jessa was saying about herself and Doliaga. When this girlfriend did eventually find out, she broke up with Doliaga, prompting his gruesome plan to kill Jessa, who he perceived as the reason for his broken relationship. Now, I want to preempt some commenters at this point because I've seen some disparaging things being said about Jessa when this case was first reported. It is absolutely jarring to me that some people think that Doliaga was justified in his actions. I do not think the same would be said if Jessa were a cis woman and not transgender. I would really like you to hear yourselves say this thought out loud. Some people truly think to this very day that because Jessa misrepresented her relationship with Doliaga and this caused his now ex-girlfriend to break up with him, it was completely fine to kill Jessa. So as a thought exercise, imagine this story that you've just heard from me, but instead of a transgender woman being killed, it was a cis woman who was killed. Would you say the same thing? Would you think Doliaga would be justified then? Another thing that had popped up in comment sections of wherever this case was discussed is the fact that there was a significant age gap between Doliaga and Jessa, and that Doliaga was a year or so shy of being 18. Some very transphobic commenters seemed to imply that the murder was justified because Jessa took advantage of Doliaga being young and a minor. I want to reiterate that there are absolutely no confirmed details about the nature of their relationship, so it is very dangerous and harmful to be assuming all sorts of stuff in order to feel good in your transphobia. We may infer and assume all we want, but we also know that our inferences and assumptions may be completely wrong, and expressing harmful views based on them can cause further hurt for the remaining family members and the LGBTQIA community at large. Now, if one looks into this case right now, the reporting on the case essentially stopped when Doliaga was given to the custody of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, owing to his minor status. Orpano, as far as my research is concerned, is still in remand. It is unclear whether either stood or will be standing trial, or whether Doliaga will be dealt with differently due to his age at the time of the killing. As for Jessa's family, they were and remain devastated. In an interview for the show Soko, Jessa's sister wished her peace, and it was clear from her demeanor that she felt a great sadness over this immense loss. As for Jessa's mother, it was very clear how she felt towards her daughter's killers. She will never forgive them, and in all honesty, who can blame her? From Pangasinan, our next case takes us a bit south to Quezon City, where we meet 21-year-old Ebeng Mayor, a transgender man whose story can only be described as deeply disturbing and upsetting. On the 17th of May 2021, Ebeng Mayor set off to meet some friends after temporarily leaving his live-in partner in Pampanga following a fight. He wanted to blow off some steam, and as I understand it, he then headed off to Quezon City. I'm not sure if Ebeng was originally from Quezon City or Pampanga, but we do know that the events following the 17th of May would all take place in Quezon City. The next day, on the 18th of May, Ebeng was invited by a close friend and another person. The plan was to hang out and drink somewhere in Barangay Payatas in QC. One of Ebeng's drinking buddies moonlighted as a small-time drug pusher at that time, and it is my understanding that Ebeng's close friend took some drugs when offered by this person. It is still not clear whether Ebeng himself took drugs that night. In some articles, I understood that Ebeng's friends and this drug pusher may have taken the drugs already way before Ebeng arrived. As the night went on and May 18th became May 19th, Ebeng's family wondered why he had not come back yet. It would seem that despite them knowing of Ebeng's plans to have a drink with friends, him being out way past midnight already seemed slightly out of character. But they did not sound the alarm at that point because I think they may have thought that doing so may either be too early or a disproportionate reaction to the current situation, and so they waited. What they did not know at that point was that Ebeng was never returning back home, and by the 19th of May, their family's nightmare was just starting. As the 19th of May drew to an end and Ebeng still failed to show up, his family made sure to now involve the police. To them, something just felt very wrong. And so the police eventually became involved and a search for Ebeng was quickly initiated. As another 24 hours passed by, Ebeng's family grew even more desperate because something was just not sitting right about this whole situation. By the 20th of May, late that afternoon, Ebeng's family received the kind of news they were dreading for almost 2 days. At around 2:30 in the afternoon on the 20th of May, a 39-year-old man who was herding his cattle at a vacant lot in Sitio Bakal in Barangay Bagong Silangan was shocked to stumble upon a badly beaten, naked, and mutilated body covered by tree branches. When I say mutilated, I really mean it. This bit is very upsetting, so again, trigger warning. The body had obviously been raped and sexually assaulted, and a wooden stick was found shoved into the person's genitalia. The police immediately knew that they were looking at a very aggravated type of murder that also seemed personal, or at least filled with immense anger. You may have guessed it already, but over the course of the day, the body was identified as that of Ebeng Mayor. When news broke out about his brutal killing, people were enraged. Specifically, LGBTQIA groups advocating for trans masculine individuals were outraged by what happened to Ebeng, especially because his murder took place just a few days after the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersexism, and Transphobia. It seemed so sadly ironic. A group named TEAM, or Trans Man Equality and Awareness Movement, released a statement, and in part it said the following, quote, "The trans masculine community is vulnerable to sexual violence in the Philippines, a country that condones rape culture and victim blaming, and a president with a penchant for making rape jokes and derogatory remarks." End of quote. This statement was alluding to the former President Rodrigo Duterte and instances of him making rather crude rape jokes. And if people fail to see why the group team made a connection between what happened to Ebeng, the general violence towards trans people, especially trans men, and Duterte's rape jokes, then they do not understand that such jokes are a vehicle to normalize rape and violence against women, femmes, and trans men. Look at it this way. If the person occupying the highest position in the country makes deeply misogynist or transphobic or homophobic comments and rape jokes, it sort of gives permission to the rest of society to make the same jokes, and in the process, this dehumanizes women, femmes, non-binary people, and trans men, opening them up to a lot of danger, violence, and loss of life. And this is what a lot of Filipino LGBTQIA groups have been saying for ages, something that is obviously included in their fight to put down into law the kind of protection that the community desperately needs, starting with the passing of the SOGI bill. In Ebeng's case, it would not take the police a long time to tell the media that they were eyeing at least two persons of interest. As I understand it, this came about because 2 days after Ebeng was found, a woman came forward and told the police that one of the people who joined the police's earlier efforts to find Ebeng was actually the same person who may have seen Ebeng last before he disappeared and was killed. According to this witness, she herself was escorted home by Ebeng and this person of interest 2 nights before Ebeng was found dead, so surely this mystery man must know something. The police were surprised and made sure to get this person into the police station for questioning. Now, this person of interest, this man was not a mysterious one after all. In fact, he was very well known to Ebeng and his family. Xander Gal de la Cruz was Ebeng's best friend. When he was first interviewed by the police, they could not really get the information they wanted from him, but then he gave in. And this is what he said happened that night Ebeng was killed. Earlier, I mentioned how Ebeng was invited by a close friend to go drinking, and that the two of them were joined by another man who also happened to be a small-time drug pusher. The close friend was actually De La Cruz, and the other man was identified as Joel Montalban Loyola, also known as Sablay. There was a third person with them, as it turned out, and his name was Richard Elvin de Lima Araza. The drinking session between the 4 of them went on without incident, but this was about to change. At around 2:30 in the morning on the 19th of May, the mood suddenly shifted. As the group was about to head to their respective homes, something just gripped Loyola and he struck Ebeng in the gut, causing him to buckle and be incapacitated. According to Xander de la Cruz, he did not want to be part of whatever was going to happen at that point, but he supposedly could not get away because he was being threatened by the other men. So, the group then took Ebeng to a vacant lot located in the next barangay, and it was there that the 3 men took turns sexually assaulting, raping, and beating up Ebeng. As if this was not horrible enough, the men wanted to make sure that Ebeng did not make any noise whilst they raped him. So one of them, it is not clear who, took a rock and hit Ebeng on the head because he started to regain consciousness at some point. I could not find any confirmation about this, but it is plausible to think that the blunt force trauma sustained from this action ultimately killed Ebeng. The men then took Ebeng's cell phone, wristwatch, and golden necklace before dumping his body in Bagong Silangan. But of course, we know that on top of all these horrific things, they also mutilated Ebeng's body by inserting a wooden stick into his genitalia. By the time Ebeng was found almost 2 days later, his body was already entering a rather advanced stage of decomposition. Loyola, De La Cruz, and Araza were immediately arrested following this revelation and were charged with rape with homicide and robbery at the Quezon City's prosecutor's office on the 22nd of May. Ebeng's phone was found in Araza's possession and a gun was recovered from Loyola, prompting the police to file additional charges against him for illegal firearm possession. Both De La Cruz and Loyola, as it turned out, were not unknown to the police. They served jail time before over illegal drug charges. What is infuriating about all this is the two were supposed to stay longer in jail for those charges, but because they were able to cut a deal through a plea bargain, they were released back into society sooner rather than later. This then begs the question whether Ebeng's murder would have been prevented if these 2 men had just served their real prison sentences. We can only speculate, but one thing that is obvious to me is that these men never learned their lesson because they were still using drugs and or selling them. I also keep thinking that drugs could have been one of the many factors that pushed these men to commit such a heinous crime. This opens up a whole new discussion about the leniency we see in some drug cases but not in others. And it also opens up another discussion on the merits of plea bargaining, but that is another conversation for another time. Ebeng's death had such a significant ripple effect not only on his family but in the Quezon City community. The death of a trans man served as a blow to the city's goal to be the most inclusive city in the country. After all, QC is amongst the first cities in the country to pass and implement a gender-fair ordinance that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Now, although Ebeng's death in the eyes of the police was not really categorized as a hate crime, and I understand if you may also come to the same conclusion, but there's no denying that this crime was filled with a lot of anger and hate, whether that be on grounds of Ebeng being trans or not, or whether there was some sort of emotion there that was just magnified by the use of drugs. For me, having covered and consumed a lot of true crime, when a murder has a sexual crime component, and if it is as brutal as this one, in a lot of cases, the actions are rooted in misogyny, which then leads the perpetrator to want to exert and demonstrate power over mostly women, femmes, non-binary people who were assigned female at birth, and of course, trans men. In cases involving lesbians or trans men, there have been instances where the motivation to rape and mutilate the person was rooted in a desire to quote-unquote correct the lesbian or the trans man, to set them quote-unquote straight, because in the perpetrator's eyes, anyone who is female or a woman or assigned female at birth must desire a man and or owes men sex. In some articles and in references to the rape of trans people, especially trans men, academics and researchers have now coined the term transphobic rape. It is all part of rape culture in the end, whichever way you want to look at it, and it is all gender-based violence. Ebeng and Jessa are just two of the many lives that we lost in the past years due to hate and prejudice. The violence against trans people is real. It is a very real threat. It is a very real part of their lives. During this month of Pride, I urge you to research, to read about trans issues not only in the Philippines but worldwide. I urge you to talk to a trans person. I urge you to listen even when you're feeling uncomfortable, because let's be honest, you are only uncomfortable because you have been raised in a world where you are taught that people can only be a certain way according to a book, a religion, or a culture. But the human experience is not as limited as you might have been taught it to be. It is a colorful spectrum. It is far from being binary. Queer, trans, and non-binary people, as well as gays and lesbians, have always existed for as long as humanity has been in existence. They have been part of our pre-colonial history as Filipinos. So this is not a Western thing. This is not being quote-unquote woke. This is just being human. In honor of the trans siblings we have lost, I want their names said out loud. Records show that there have been around 70 to 80 deaths of trans people in the Philippines since 2007. Before that, we do not have any records. So, to help me say these names out loud, I have asked some good friends of mine to lend their voices to this episode. May the beautiful souls of those we have lost rest in peace, and may we see a better future for all our trans siblings who are still here with us today.
Julie Katamin, Pet Galea, Arvin Lee Madrianon, J. Pangkia, Ebeng Mayor,
Sally Camatoy, Jelwin Tolentino, Luningning Alsade, Herminia Lidoma, Mateo Vicente,
Erica Andrina, Nicole Kilaneta, R.R. Bondok, F. Escalante, L.E. Parama,
Sam Bernal, Natalia Ann Gonzalez, J. Ganito,
Cielo Mercado, Jennifer Laude,
Mary Joy Año Nuevo, Glidel Libranda, Jaja Canlas, Simeona Eva, Barbie Ashley Ann Riley,
Charlotte Kias Lapasaran Logroño, Jane, Mia Montalegre, JRP Mangalili, Shania,
Kat May Fermin, Aya Sapphire, Myla Gonzalez, Heart De Chavez, JM Cipriano,
Heart Pontanes, Jessa Remiendo, Kathleen Aviles, Donna Niera, Emmy Iruma.
S. Militante, Brian Galian, Cindy Jones Torres, Muslima Hasim, R. Tamboong, K. Abdul Gajir, Vergel Catalonia Tumikad. Lagim fam, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Lagim. I hope you found this episode valuable and or interesting. If you do, make sure to rate and review my podcast on Apple and Spotify because it helps with making my podcast more visible to those who do not know about it yet. And sorry if I sound very much full of cold because I am. So I tried to take it slow for this episode. I promise I will be much better by the next episode. Also, Lagim fam, make sure you follow me on all my socials. Check the show notes for all the links to my Insta, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook accounts. Until next episode, thank you Lagim fam, maraming salamat at mabuhay.